The last thing Dante Moretti expected to find behind his gates was a ghost. It was well past midnight, the freezing rain turning the marble of his estate into a cold, slick tomb. His security team remained at the perimeter, leaving Dante alone with the smell of his expensive cigar and the weight of a brutal day. But as he neared the service entrance, a sound stopped him. Not a footfall, not a threat, but the metallic scrape of heavy lids against a dumpster. He drew his weapon, the hammer clicking back with lethal precision. On any other night, an intruder meant a shallow grave in the woods. Tonight, it meant a reckoning he wasn't prepared for. Dante rounded the corner, gun leveled, and froze. There, perched on the edge of the industrial bin like a broken bird, was a young girl. She was soaked to the bone, her dark skin ashen from the cold, her eyes hollow in a way that suggested she had seen the end of the world and survived it. In her trembling hands wasn't a weapon or a stolen jewel, but a discarded, half-frozen container of steak tips from his own dinner table. She didn't scream, she didn't run, she simply looked at the barrel of his gun with a terrifying calmness. "Are you going to do it now?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp against the wind. "I'm tired of waiting." The words hit Dante harder than any bullet ever could. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out to pull her from the filth, but as he grabbed her arm, his flashlight caught her wrist. He stopped breathing. There, etched into her skin, was a star-shaped birthmark, a mark he had only seen once before, on the brother he had failed to save. In that moment, the ghost of the Moretti family felt his own heart beat for the first time in 20 years. This wasn't just a starving child. She was his blood, a living testament to a sin he thought he'd buried, and the only person left in the world who could truly destroy him. Dante's hand shook as he held the girl's wrist. The star-shaped birthmark seemed to glow under the harsh beam of his flashlight. It was a perfect match to the one his brother Leo had carried. For years, the syndicate had told Dante that Leo's family was gone, wiped out in the same fire that took his brother. They told him there were no loose ends left to tie. But the living, breathing proof was currently shivering in front of him, covered in the grime of his own shadows. He looked from the mark to the girl's face. Now that he was looking, he saw it. She had Leo's stubborn chin and the same deep, guarded eyes. This wasn't just a scavenger. This was Naya. She was the child of the woman Dante had sent away years ago, a woman he had exiled to the harshest parts of the city just to keep the Moretti name clean of scandal. He had thought he was protecting the family reputation. Instead, he had thrown his own blood into the mouth of a wolf. "Who gave you this?" Dante asked, his voice cracking like dry wood. He pointed to the birthmark, but Naya pulled her arm back, tucking it into the oversized, wet sweatshirt that drowned her tiny frame. "My mom said it's a map," she whispered, her teeth chattering so hard he could hear them. "She said if I ever got lost, the stars would bring me back to where I belong. But she's sick now. She can't read the map anymore." The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. Dante looked at the massive golden doors of his mansion and then back at the dumpster. He had spent 30 years building a wall between himself and the rest of the world. He was the ghost, the man who felt nothing and feared no one. But as he looked at Naya, the wall didn't just crack, it turned to dust. He realized with a sickening jolt that his men had lied to him. They had watched him mourn a niece who was actually alive and starving just miles away. His own associates had let this happen. If they found out Naya was here, they wouldn't see a child. They would see a mistake that needed to be erased. Dante reached out, but this time he didn't grab her. He held his hand open, palm up, in a rare gesture of peace. "You aren't lost anymore, Naya," he said, the name feeling strange and holy on his tongue. She looked at his hand, then at the heavy gun he had tucked back into his holster. For a long second, she hesitated. Then she reached out and placed her small, cold hand into his. The heat of her skin against his palm sent a shock through his system. She was real. She was family. "Come with me," Dante commanded, but the iron was gone from his tone. "We're going inside. And Nia, from this moment on, you don't eat from the dark anymore. The heavy back door of the mansion creaked open, but Dante didn't lead Nia through the main hall where his guards stood like stone statues. Instead, he guided her through a narrow servant's passage. He moved with the quiet grace of a shadow, his hand resting lightly on Nia's shoulder to keep her close. Every time a floorboard groaned, Nia flinched, her eyes darting around the dim hallway. She looked like a bird waiting for a cage to snap shut. They reached the guest wing, a part of the house Dante rarely visited. He pushed open the door to a room filled with soft velvet chairs and silk curtains. It was a place meant for kings, yet Nia stood by the door, afraid to let her muddy sneakers touch the thick white carpet. Dante didn't care about the carpet. He walked to a small table and sat her down, then disappeared into the hallway. A few minutes later, he returned with a wooden tray. He hadn't called the chef. He didn't want anyone to see her yet. On the tray was a simple loaf of crusty bread, a block of yellow butter, and a glass of cold milk. To Dante, this was nothing, just the kind of snack he might ignore while looking for a vintage bottle of wine. But as he set the tray down, Nia's entire body changed. Her eyes grew wide, reflecting the light from the crystal lamp. She reached out with a shaking hand and touched the bread as if it were made of gold. She didn't tear into it like a wild animal. Instead, she broke off a small piece, spread a thick layer of butter on it, and closed her eyes as she took a bite. Dante sat in the shadows of the room, watching her. He saw the way her shoulders finally relaxed. He watched her sip the milk slowly, trying to make the moment last as long as possible. It hit him then, a sharp pain in his chest that no enemy had ever been able to cause. He looked around the room at the expensive paintings on the walls and the gold-plated handles on the drawers. He thought about the thousands of dollars he spent on silk suits and fancy dinners that he often threw away half-eaten. He had lived in a world of waste while his own brother's daughter was searching through trash for a crust of bread. "Is it enough?" Dante asked quietly. Nia looked up, a small smear of butter on her lip. "It's the best thing I've ever tasted," she whispered. "I didn't think people really ate like this. I thought it was just in the movies." Dante looked away, unable to meet her innocent gaze. He had built an empire to feel powerful, but sitting in this room with a hungry child, he felt smaller than he had ever felt before. He realized that Nia didn't need his titles or his money. She needed the very things he had spent 30 years trying to forget: a home, a name, and a family that didn't let its own starve in the rain. As the girl finished the last of the bread, Dante made a silent vow. He would find out who had lied to him about Nia's death, and he would make sure she never looked at a piece of bread like it was a miracle ever again. Dante left Nia under the watchful eye of a trusted maid, who was too scared to ask questions. He climbed into his black car and drove away from the bright lights of the hill. The further he went, the darker the streets became. He eventually reached the slums, a place where the buildings looked like they were leaning on each other just to stay upright. This was the world he had forced Nia's mother into, Elena, years ago. Back then, he thought he was being a strong leader. Now, it just felt like he had been a bully. He stopped in front of a crumbling apartment building. The air smelled of old smoke and damp concrete. Dante walked up the stairs, his expensive shoes sounding loud against the rotting wood. He found the door he was looking for, room 4B. It wasn't locked. Inside, the room was tiny and cold, but it was neat. A single bed sat in the corner where a woman lay sleeping fitfully, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. This was Elena. She looked like a shadow of the woman he remembered. Dante didn't wake her. His eyes were drawn to a small metal box sitting on a wobbly nightstand. He opened it, expecting to find money or jewelry. Instead, he found a thick stack of envelopes. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the handwriting. It was Leo's. He picked up the first letter. It was dated weeks before Leo died. As Dante read the words, his blood turned to ice. Leo had written to Elena every single day. He told her he was coming for them. He wrote about a secret bank account he had set up for Nia's future. He promised that no matter what the syndicate said, he would never leave them behind. But as Dante looked at the envelopes, he saw that none of them had postmarks. They had never been mailed. They had been hand-delivered, but the seals were all broken. Someone had intercepted these letters. Someone had read Leo's private dreams and then hidden them in this box, making Elena believe that Leo had forgotten her. Dante realized the truth was even worse than he imagined. His brother hadn't died in a random fire. Leo was planning to quit the Mafia, to be a father. The syndicate hadn't just lied about Nia being dead. They had likely killed Leo to stop him from leaving. They had kept Elena and Nia in this basement of a life to make sure the secret stayed buried. He clutched the letters so hard the paper crinkled. He had spent years serving the very men who had destroyed his brother's heart. He looked at the sick woman on the bed and thought of the brave little girl back at the mansion. The ghost was gone. In his place was a man who finally had a reason to go to war. He tucked the letters inside his coat and stepped back into the hallway. The syndicate thought they had silenced Leo, but Dante was about to make sure his brother's voice was finally heard. Dante returned to the mansion while the sun was still hidden behind the clouds. He walked through the halls with his head down, the stolen letters feeling like lead weights in his pocket. He tried to act like everything was normal, but in a house built on secrets, even a change in the way a man breathes is noticed. Standing by the grand staircase was Sal. Sal had been Dante's right-hand man for 15 years. He was a man who noticed everything, the way a person's eyes twitched when they lied, or the way a hand moved toward a hidden blade. Right now, Sal was looking at Dante with a narrow, questioning gaze. "You're back early, boss," Sal said. His voice was smooth, but it had a sharp edge to it. "I went to your study to talk about the shipment from the docks, but you weren't there, and the kitchen staff is confused." Dante stopped but didn't look up. "Confused about what, Sal?" "They say you went in there yourself last night. They say a tray of food went up to the guest wing, but no guests were checked in," Sal replied. He stepped closer, his heavy boots clicking on the marble floor. "You want to tell me what's going on? The syndicate is already talking. They think you're getting distracted." Dante finally raised his head. His face was a mask of cold stone, the same look that had earned him the name The Ghost. He knew that if Sal suspected a child was in the house, the news would reach the other families in an hour. In their world, a child wasn't a blessing. She was a target. "I don't report to the kitchen staff, and I certainly don't report to you. If I want a guest in my house, that is my business. Tell the men to focus on the docks and stay out of the north wing." Sal didn't move. He tilted his head, his eyes scanning Dante's expensive coat. "You've got dirt on your shoes, Dante, the kind of gray mud you only find down by the old tenements. You haven't been to a business meeting. You've been visiting the past." The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it might snap. For a second, Dante thought about telling Sal the truth, but then he remembered the intercepted letters. He didn't know who he could trust anymore. If the syndicate had killed his brother, anyone in this house could be an enemy. "Get out of my way, Sal," Dante commanded. Sal stepped aside, but the look in his eyes wasn't one of loyalty. It was a look of deep suspicion. As Dante walked past, he felt the back of his neck prickle. He knew he was being watched. The walls of his empire were starting to close in, and the silent war was just beginning. He had Naya safe for now, but his world was no longer a fortress. It was a cage, and the locks were starting to turn. Dante stood in the center of the guest room with his hands behind his back. He looked at Naya, who was sitting on the edge of the large bed. She looked much better now that she was warm and clean, but she still seemed tiny against the giant furniture. Dante knew the danger was growing. Sal was watching him, and the syndicate was whispering. He decided he had to teach Naya how to survive the way he did. He wanted to show her how to hide, how to be silent, and how to never trust anyone. "Naya," Dante said, his voice firm, "in this house, you have to be like a shadow. If you hear a door open, you go to the closet. If a stranger talks to you, you say nothing. People are dangerous, and the only way to stay safe is to keep your heart like a piece of ice." Naya looked at him, but she didn't look scared. Instead, she reached under her pillow and pulled out a small stack of papers. They were crinkled and stained with old rain, but they were covered in bright colors. "I don't want to be a shadow," she said softly. I want to be like these." She handed him the drawings. Dante took them, expecting to see doodles of toys or houses. Instead, he saw faces. There was a drawing of a man with a big smile and a star on his wrist, his brother, Leo. Next to him was a woman with kind eyes holding a little girl's hand. But the drawing that stopped Dante's breath was the last one. It showed a tall man in a dark suit. He wasn't smiling, but he was holding an umbrella over the woman and the child to keep them dry. "That's you," Naya whispered, pointing to the man in the suit. "My mom told me stories about the brother who lived in the big house. She said you were the one who sent us away, but she told me not to be mad. She said staying mad is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to get sick. She told me to draw you so I wouldn't forget that I still had a family out there." Dante felt the ice around his heart melt a little more. He had come here to teach her how to be a warrior, but she was teaching him how to be a human being. He realized that Naya's strength didn't come from a gun or a secret. It came from a heart that refused to turn cold. He sat down on the bed next to her and looked at the drawing of himself. For the first time in 30 years, the ghost didn't want to hide. He wanted to be the man in the picture, the one who kept the rain off the people he loved. The peace inside the guest room did not last long. Outside the mansion walls, the city was talking. In the world of the Mafia, a secret is like a drop of blood in a pool of sharks. It only takes a second for the scent to spread. Dante had tried to be careful, but he had underestimated how much his enemies were watching his every move. Deep in the heart of the city, in a building made of cold glass and steel, a man named Lorenzo sat behind a desk. Lorenzo was the boss of the rival family, a man who had spent years trying to find a crack in Dante's armor. He had always feared the ghost because Dante had nothing to lose. But that morning, a message had arrived from someone inside Dante's house. The message was short, but it changed everything. The ghost has a heart. It's 8 years old and wearing a star on its wrist. Lorenzo smiled, a slow and cruel look that never reached his eyes. He realized that Nia wasn't just a child. She was the ultimate weapon. If he could take her, he could make Dante do anything. He could take over the docks, the streets, and the empire Dante had built over 30 years. The secret was no longer a hidden treasure. It was a bullseye. Back at the mansion, Dante felt the change in the air before he heard the news. The guards were whispering more than usual, and the phone in his study wouldn't stop ringing. He walked into his office and saw a single black envelope sitting on his desk. It wasn't from Sal or the syndicate. It had Lorenzo's mark on it, a silver viper. Dante opened it with steady fingers, but his stomach twisted as he read the words. "I heard you found something precious in the trash, Dante. It would be a shame if she went missing again. We should talk about the docks before someone gets hurt." Dante crushed the paper in his fist. His heart pounded against his ribs. He had spent his whole life making sure he had no weaknesses, and now the most important person in his life was a target because of him. He realized that keeping Nia hidden in the guest wing wasn't enough anymore. The leak had happened, and the wolves were already at the door. He looked out the window at the iron gates of his estate. They used to make him feel safe, but now they just felt like a cage that his enemies were about to break open. He had to move fast. He had to decide if he was going to play Lorenzo's game or if he was going to do something so bold that it would terrify everyone who thought he'd gone soft. Dante didn't care about the docks or the money anymore. He only cared about the little girl upstairs who was currently coloring a picture of a family. The war was no longer about business. It was about survival. The air in the mansion felt like a storm was about to break. Dante was summoned to the grand boardroom in the basement, a cold place with no windows, where the syndicate leaders met to decide who lived and who died. As he walked in, 5 older men sat around a long table. They looked like statues made of gray ash. Sal stood in the corner, his arms crossed, his eyes refusing to meet Dante's. "We know about the girl, Dante," the oldest man said. His voice sounded like sandpaper on stone. "Lorenzo is already using her to threaten our business. You have brought a weakness into this house. In our world, a weakness is a disease. You know what must be done to keep the family safe." Dante stood at the head of the table. He knew exactly what they were asking. They wanted Nia gone. They wanted him to dispose of her, a cold word for a terrible act, just to prove that he was still the heartless leader they expected him to be. For 30 years, Dante had followed their rules. He had put the syndicate above everything, even his own brother. "She is a child," Dante said, his voice low and steady, "and she is my blood. Blood is a luxury we cannot afford. If you do not get rid of her by dawn, you are no longer one of us. You will lose your protection, your money, and your life. Is one girl worth the empire you built?" Dante didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound book. It was his personal ledger. Inside were the names of every person who owed him a favor, every secret debt he held over the city, and the records of every dollar he had made for the syndicate. It was the source of his power. It was the only thing that kept the other leaders in line. He walked over to the fireplace at the end of the room. The orange flames licked at the logs. Without a word, Dante tossed the ledger into the center of the fire. The men at the table gasped and stood up, their chairs screeching against the floor. "What are you doing? That is millions of dollars. That is our leverage over the city," Sal shouted, taking a step forward. Dante watched as the pages curled and turned to black soot. The names and debts disappeared into the smoke. He turned back to the men, and for the first time, he felt truly free. "You want to know if she is worth the empire?" Dante asked. "The empire is just paper and ash. It was built on lies told about my brother and his daughter. You can keep the docks, you can keep the streets, but you will never touch that girl." By burning the ledger, Dante had wiped away the debts that held his world together. He was no longer their leader, but he was also no longer their servant. He walked out of the room, leaving the most powerful men in the city staring at a pile of glowing embers. He knew this meant war, and he knew they would be coming for him. But as he headed for the stairs to Nia's room, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a man who finally knew what was worth fighting for. The alarm didn't ring with a loud bell. It started as a low hum on Dante's phone, telling him the perimeter fence had been cut. He didn't panic. He had spent his whole life preparing for battles, but this was the first time he was fighting for something he actually loved. He didn't head for the steel-lined safe room in the basement. Instead, he grabbed his tactical gear and moved toward the north wing. He knew that if he hid in a box, Nia would be left alone. The first explosion rocked the front gates, sending a tremor through the floorboards. Dante reached Nia's room just as she was waking up, her eyes wide and blurry with sleep. Outside, the screech of tires and the shouts of men filled the night air. Lorenzo's men were here, and they weren't coming for money. "Nia, stay under the bed and do not make a sound until I come for you," Dante said. He spoke quickly, but kept his voice as calm as a summer lake. He didn't want her to feel his own heart racing. She nodded, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and slid onto the floor. Dante stepped into the hallway and shut the door. He turned off the lights, letting the mansion fall into a deep, heavy darkness. He knew every corner of this house. He knew which floorboards creaked and where the shadows were thickest. He wasn't just a man with a gun anymore. He was a hunter in his own woods. The back windows shattered as the first wave of attackers broke inside. Dante didn't wait for them to find him. He moved like a ghost, using the narrow hallways to surprise them. He used a smoke canister to fill the hall with a thick white fog. In the confusion, he took down 3 of Lorenzo's men before they could even see his face. He was fast, quiet, and focused. Every time a bullet hit the wall near him, he didn't flinch. He just thought of the drawing Nia had made of him holding the umbrella. The biggest moments of tension came when Sal appeared at the end of the hall. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. He was dressed for war. For a second, the 2 men stared at each other through the smoke. Sal looked at the door to Nia's room and then back at Dante. "You're throwing everything away for a kid who doesn't even know you, Dante," Sal yelled over the sound of the sirens. "She knows enough," Dante replied. Sal raised his weapon, but Dante was faster. He didn't aim to kill his old friend. He shot the light fixture above Sal's head, bringing the heavy glass crashing down. In the darkness and the noise, Dante pushed forward, driving the attackers back toward the stairs. He fought with a fierce energy that terrified the men. They had seen Dante, the ghost, before, but they had never seen Dante, the protector. By the time the sun began to peek over the trees, the mansion was quiet again. The attackers had fled, realizing that the ghost was more dangerous now than he had ever been. Dante leaned against Nia's door, catching his breath. He was tired and bruised, but the door behind him was still closed, and the girl inside was still safe. The morning sunlight filled the hallway, shining through the broken glass and dust left from the night. Dante pushed open the door to the guest room. He found Nia exactly where he had left her, curled up under the bed. When she saw his face, she didn't look at the scratches on his arms or the dirt on his clothes. She only looked at his eyes. She saw that the cold, empty look was gone. Dante knelt on the floor and reached out. "It's over, Nia. You can come out now." He helped her up and sat her on the edge of the bed. Her face was smudged with dust and a few dried tears from when the house had shaken. Dante picked up a soft, warm cloth and carefully began to clean her face. He was the man whose hands had controlled the whole city, yet he moved with the gentleness of someone handling a fragile butterfly. As the dirt disappeared, the bright, brave girl underneath returned. "Are the bad men gone?" she asked in a small voice. "They are gone," Dante said, looking her directly in the eyes. "And they are never coming back. You don't have to be a shadow anymore, Nia. You don't have to hide in pantries or search in the dark. From now on, you walk through the front door. You sit at the big table. You belong here." Nia looked at the star birthmark on her wrist. "Does the map finally lead home?" Dante felt a lump in his throat, but he smiled. "Yes, it does." Later that afternoon, Dante sat at his desk. He wasn't looking at ledgers or maps of the docks. Instead, he was looking at legal papers. His lawyer had arrived, looking nervous after seeing the damage to the mansion. But Dante didn't care about the broken windows. He signed his name at the bottom of the last page with a steady hand. The papers officially made Nia his daughter. She was no longer a secret or a scavenger. She was a Moretti. He walked out to the garden where Nia was sitting on a bench looking at the flowers. Her mother, Elena, was resting in a nearby room, finally getting the medicine and the tear she needed to get well. Dante sat down next to Nia and handed her a new set of drawing markers. "I have a new rule for this house," Dante said. Nia looked up, curious. "What is it?" "No more being invisible," he said. "We are going to be a family that people actually see, a family that helps people instead of hurting them." Nia leaned her head against his arm. For the first time in his life, Dante Moretti didn't feel like a ghost. He didn't feel the need to look over his shoulder or wonder who was coming for him. He had lost an empire of fear, but he had gained a kingdom of love. As he watched Nia draw a new picture, one where the sun was shining and the man in the suit was finally smiling, he knew he had made the best deal of his life.